Good afternoon, team. Just want to thank you for joining us today for the PB Tech and Darktrace cybersecurity virtual panel. We're going to have a great 45 minutes this afternoon, just sort of talking through one of the most important subject matter topics of today's environment. The funny thing is about cybersecurity, it's we were talking amongst the team, and it's a bit of a thankless task. You can sort of only get it wrong. You know, you can't get it right from a directors and a shareholders and a stakeholders perspective, at least. It's a very difficult thing to put your finger on and make sure you've got your bases covered. In the New Zealand IT environment, we find that often it's an underfunded and under-acknowledged piece of the business until things go pear-shaped. So we've got a great panel of guests today. We've got Liam and Victoria. So Liam and Vicky, do you want to turn on your cameras and introduce yourselves? And we can crack into it.
Thanks, Rodney. Yes, Liam Derby, Director of Red Team over at Darktrace. So a bit of background myself. I spent about 10 years working in Australian government, working in national security matters.
Liam, we've got an L and a D. We don't have your handsome face.
Oh, really? No one else can see my face?
No.
Oh, I can see my face. Oh, sorry to deprive you. Hopefully it pops up soon, or maybe that'll give you some relief if you don't. So hopefully it kicks in. But yeah. So spent 10 years working in national security for Australian government. Had a brief sojourn in professional services, working with large corporations and their cybersecurity programs. And been at Darktrace for getting close to 3 years now. Looking both in their analytical side of the house and more recently on their offensive security side of the house.
Okay.
I think you've got to put up with my ugly mug, but like Liam, I've also been in government for 10 years. I was with the New Zealand Police, leaving as a detective. Other than that, I'm not going to tell you how old I am. I'll leave you to guess. But yeah, that's me. I've been at Darktrace for maybe just coming on 3 years now, and I've been continually impressed with the level of investigative prowess that it has. So, yeah.
Yeah. So the purpose of this, well, what initiated this session for us at PB Tech is that we've got a lot of customers that have got a security plan in place. They've got firewalls in place. They've got subscriptions and gateway protection around their firewalling. They've got end user defenses in place, so they've got an antivirus product on their laptops and desktops, and in some cases mobile phones. Yet we see in our market, you know, the biggest and the most obvious dog's breakfast that's happened lately is with Waikato District Health Board. Now that's a large organisation in New Zealand that most definitely had an endpoint protection in place, that most definitely had firewalling security in place, yet they still got hacked. So bringing that down to all of New Zealand business, it's really important for us, at least at PB Tech, to be talking to our customers just about how you position your own business to make sure that you've got your bases covered, and whether you do have your bases covered or not. And so those are the important things that we wanted to cover today. So let's maybe start talking about that, Vicky and Liam. Just, you know, the difference between what you're seeing in the market around the world, and particularly in the Australia, New Zealand regions. What are the trends that we're coming across?
Yeah, I'll go first, mate. So yeah, I guess maybe it's reassuring, maybe it's alarming, depending on where you kind of sit. But New Zealand threat landscape is very much indicative of what's happening in the Western world. The only difference, I guess, what you're alluding to, Rodney, is maybe the security teams, the security programs are maybe not as well resourced as you would maybe find in somewhere like the US or the UK. But I guess you can infer a lot of what's happening around the world is happening here in New Zealand, and that's sort of indicative of recent NCSE advice came out a few days ago that was just reiterating that to New Zealand. A lot of that is because it is a borderless crime, but I guess the types of victims we're seeing overseas, the victimology is very similar. We see in New Zealand as well. We're seeing the same types of companies. We're seeing healthcare. We're seeing government of all levels, like local, state, federal, we're seeing basically, attacks happen wherever they're successful. They're being very, at the moment, quite indiscriminate. When it comes to, I guess, the types of crimes we're seeing, or types of malicious activity we're seeing, and when it comes to pure dollar values, business email compromise is still the number one, has been for years. It often gets forgotten about because it's such a simple crime, but it's very, very easy for attackers to implement. It's low success rate, but if they send 10,000 emails and it costs them 0.001% of that, and one person clicks on it and then goes ahead, that's potentially tens of thousands of dollars for them. So it really justifies the outlay. I guess what's though more impactful for businesses is still obviously the conversation about ransomware, and where we're a trend. Everyone's trying to figure out what's going on with ransomware, and one of the reasons why it's been sort of hard to figure out where it is kind of going, there's been a lot of failed predictions, is I think it's because of the expansion of its use through different malicious actors. So what I mean by that is when ransomware first sort of came out a few years back, the people who were using it were the ones developing it. So they were very, technically sophisticated, and they had criminal, intent in mind. So monetizing, the attack. Now, skip forward a few years, what we're seeing now is we're still seeing them doing it, but we're also seeing some very low skilled actors doing it, who they almost have zero technical skills, who are joining ransomware affiliates and getting, a how-to ransomware guide and doing it by the numbers. So we're seeing them using ransomware, but we're also seeing state-based actors who are incredibly sophisticated doing it. And they're doing it both for money, in the instance of North Korea, because of sanctions. But then on the other side, we see countries using it for disruptive purposes as well. So it's a bit of a smokescreen to hide the fact that they're trying to bring down some kind of capability in an adversary country. Iran is increasingly doing this, but I guess the most pointed to actor is topically Russia, and the biggest example we've seen of this is targeting Ukraine a few years back through the NotPetya attack. So for defenders, it makes it really hard because we're not actually confined to one attacker type, where it's pretty much the tool of everyone at the moment. So it makes it hard for us to track and prevent. So on that warm thought, Vicky, what are you seeing from more of a technical point of view in your analytical side?
Yeah, well, I'll keep with the theme with ransomware, actually, because we're seeing some, I don't want to say interesting developments, but just when you thought it can get any worse, it is. So we're seeing a rise in double encryption. So two sort of approaches to this. We've got layered double encryption, where your system will go down with ransomware, one strain of ransomware, and you'll get another strain of ransomware over the top of that. So the victim themselves will get one ransomware note. If they choose to pay, they may get decrypted, only to find another ransomware note, which is particularly nasty, if you ask me. The other side of it is we've got side-by-side double encryption, where part of the network has been encrypted with one strain and another part is on another strain, and typically you'll get two ransomware notes.
Does that really mean that the days of paying your ransom are pointless? I mean, back when it was, ransom hackers with ethics, you could sort of pay your money and know that you're going to get it back, and hopefully, it was a win-win situation for the hacker. If ransomware in general these days is being sold out to every man and their dog with no ethics, then are the days of actually paying it and getting your data back foolishly behind us?
I'm not sure. It's a really grey area, if I'm honest. It seems to be at the whim of the attacker. Some attackers do have that sort of honor among thieves, where they will actually unencrypt your data. And I suppose if you're one of the bigger organizations, you have more clout potentially, but it's not unheard of for them to stay in your network for 6 months and then hit you again once you have paid. So there is a big and broader conversation about whether we are or should be paying the ransom. Are we just making a rod for our own back? So, yeah, I don't know if I can answer that one clearly.
If I jump in, I reckon what's led to that is the ransomware as a service affiliate model, where you've got these low entry people who haven't really put the time and effort in, just trying to make a buck and leaving. And it's seeing a massive uptick in it. We've seen instances where they're not following targeting advice. So after the Colonial Pipeline, ransomware, heads of ransomwares were saying, be cool on critical infrastructure, particularly in the US. Or in the start of COVID, it was like everyone be cool on hospitals and healthcare, but they just they've got little control of these guys, so they don't even know who they are. So they do what they do because if it earns them money, they'll do it. So if it keeps going this way, yeah, they'll break the model, which is, I guess, not a bad thing, but it'd be a painful process to get it to do it that way.
Cool. Well, let's move on to the technologies that are supposed to stop this. As I mentioned in the intro, we've got the end user device protection, which is typically software, of course, that sits on our devices, and then you've got the gateway protection. What trends are we seeing? I know from PB we get sales pitches all the time from all of the vendors. Largely, our security teams tell us that multiple vendors is better rather than worse, rather than throwing all your eggs into one basket. And then, of course, along comes the magic machine learning that every vendor is talking about at the moment. So, Vicky, do you want to sort of talk about what machine learning is at the big picture, and then we'll go into maybe more about Darktrace and how that fits into that space. But machine learning overall, what are we seeing, and is that the game changer that it's proclaimed to be at that end user protection?
Yeah, great question. I think there's different types of machine learning, and I do think it is becoming a little bit of a buzzword in the industry. So we've got to be careful of whether it's underlying architecture or whether it's a bolt-on add-on. So there's a difference between supervised and unsupervised machine learning. Liam, do you want to maybe do a difference point on that?
Supervised machine learning, which is often what you see when people talk about machine learning, is what I'll do is I'll give a training set of data to the machine learning, because obviously the keyword being learning, it figures out whatever the problem it's trying to do, gets saturated in that data, and then what they do is they kind of cut it off and go, yep, that the data is good now, the learning is good, we will stop feeding it data, and now we just implement. And that's okay if there are no further developments, or you have in whatever you're learning, or if you have 100% access to all the information that that you need to make the learning accurate. But that doesn't really happen in practice. So, example, like if you're trying to learn a network, which we see often, is that we'll try to take a snapshot of the network and then go, all right, okay, we'll just apply that machine learning later on so we can detect what's normal and what's not normal. But as we all know, business practices change. We add new infrastructure all the time. So the longer and longer you leave it without it learning, then it ends up sort of not working very well. On the unsupervised machine learning path is where kind of we sit, is that we start with a blank slate kind of approach. So what happens with that is you're constantly learning all the time. So the learning never stops. So it kind of ages like a fine wine. And as things kind of slowly change in your business in different ways, it can catch up with you and move with you. So it doesn't require any kind of tuning or anything like that. It kind of moves with you. There are definitely different, there is a true good application for things like supervised machine learning, but often in security, when we can't predict what is going to happen, when we're using supervised machine learning, it has its limitations.
So back in the good old days when I started in IT, you had all of the vendors like Symantec and so forth that would whitelist and blacklist organizations and viruses and so forth. So they'd all go off to base somewhere in the ether and find out that an executable was a naughty one, and then that would update your little antivirus on your things or your gateway, and it would stop those kinds of executables. And there's no doubt a whole room full of beavers were tapping away saying naughty, naughty, good, good, and then pushing that out all over the world. And now along comes the machine learning that we're having the new sales pitches from all of the vendors, which is we're doing effectively the same thing, but with patterns of activity. So if an executable is trying to access a DLL or plant a DLL in that way and then do an encryption in that way and in this order, then we're going to block that whole executable no matter what it's called or where it came from. So is that what you're talking about in terms of the machine learning that's supervised, or supervised machine learning?
Yeah, depending on how granular they get. So if they're focusing on, and this is where it kind of gets interesting as well, and it's a bit of a semantic difference, but if the machine learning is focused on only learning what is bad, like trying to find bad actors, right? It's really hard to map that and to predict that. And very much like, avoiding IOCs, attackers will move with that, right? Like if I change this behavior slightly, I'll break the system. So if we use ML to basically keep on trying to chase the tails of attackers, it lends into their way of doing things, because there always going to be a latency between them doing new behaviors and then an update in approach or detections or whatever. I think where we come in and where others, who apply this successfully come in, is actually going the reverse and learning what's normal on a machine. So rather than going, this is always bad, we go, well, this is normal. And that's actually easier to map when you think about it. You look at a device and you sit there and just kind of learn that one device or that one network. And so when something weird comes in, you do see maybe a process that doesn't run all the time, in a weird way that's kind of chained. It can go, whoa, okay, well, I don't know for sure that's bad, but I know it's not normal. And then when you start stacking those abnormalities together, then you can really see some interesting security instances sort of come to the fore.
We'll answer questions as we go along, and I see one's popped up there from John. What's the average cost of a ransomware attack in the ANZ region? I know we were talking about it before the session. John, the answer to that is approximately $170,000 across the Australia, New Zealand averages, which are the ones that we know about, of course. So that's I've had one customer was $18,000 for a little small 10-user business that came to us to try and fix the situation. And then I think the toll one was 18 million or something. So they range quite a lot. So, but 170K US is the figure to throw around to your bosses. That's for sure.
Remember, that may be the ransom. It doesn't come into account with your downtime or your reputational damage as well, which is hard to put a figure on.
Yeah. So moving forward, then you've got this wonderful new endpoint device protection with the wonderful new machine learning, which is picking up on patterns of historic and known patterns of hacking. You've got your firewall with your subscription that's stopping things at your gateway. What is the middle piece that's missing? I know the answer is Darktrace, of course, because your salespeople in the end. But what is the concepts of the middle piece, and why if you've got both pieces and you think you're safe, why are you not safe, and why do you need something else in the middle? So talk us through that.
Well, so I guess one of the things I'll say is that, at the end of the day, even still using ML, endpoint detection and gateways are still perimeter preventative, solutions, right? Their idea is to sit on the perimeter and stop bad things from coming into through the outsides, to make sure that the insides are nice and protected, and that your crown jewels are kind of left alone. One of the issues with that approach, that's not a bad approach. Everyone should have perimeter solutions. Everyone should have gateways, email gateways. They should have all of that lined up. However, it lacks a defense in depth kind of approach. So what happens if they get through? And if you've got nothing kind of looking at that, giving you that visibility of what's happening within your network, and nothing, and potentially nothing reacting to those anomalous events, the attacker kind of has free range. And we can actually infer this is how attackers are thinking as well, because when we see things like ransomware, when you look at all the TTPs and all that kind of stuff, one of the things that is common against all groups is endpoint evasion. So one of the first things they do is they come in, they try to figure out, does it have an endpoint, and can I turn it off? And that's and they don't worry about anything else. They don't do any other kind of reconnaissance, which they probably could, to find out is anything else running, anything else that's not an endpoint detection tool. But they choose to kind of just stop there, knowing that most kind of, a lot of organizations kind of stop there. And once they're blind to the endpoint, then they can just have their free run and be as noisy as, as they want. Vic, do you have any other thoughts, mate?
No, I think you got it. Bang on.
Very good. So Darktrace, of course, learns what's normal in your organization. So if you did have a hacker come in, gets through your gateway, starts emailing around people, starts encrypting files, starts jumping across different ports in your network to try and get to different data and different files that they want to encrypt in databases and so forth. Why don't we, I guess, jump into a demo of how Darktrace can stop that kind of behavior where an endpoint protection product can't.
Hopefully you guys can see my screen.
Yep.
Yeah, it looks great, mate.
Fantastic. Just before we jump through the demo there, oh, actually, no, I'll let you take it away.
All right. No worries. So Vicky will drive. I'll chat with my disembodied voice. So this is the Darktrace Enterprise Immune System. So we have different platforms. This is our foundational platform that we created. We also have an email, which I'll show you in a sec. But to sort of go through what this is, so what we can see here is a map of the world. We can see those little blocks of different subnets in this particular environment. So this environment is a redacted environment from a customer's environment from a while back. If we zoom into one of those, you can see the various other subnets that are part of that block, that geographical block. The different color coding. So Darktrace, we like color coding for ease of analysis, really gamify it, to use a buzzword. So the cooler colors are things that are less of a threat, and the more red and angry are, the more problems you potentially have. So obviously you see those ones flashing yellow. If you're investigating into your environment, maybe that's where you decide to start. On the left, we've got some statistics associated with this particular environment. So up the top, the patterns of life thing. So that's, the what is normal in this environment. So this is all the various patterns of life that Darktrace learned that says, hey, this is the baseline we compare all activity to. So when something comes in, a connection that's kind of different, also it comes in, it goes, okay, is this different? And if so, how different is it? And if it's different enough to be significant, what kind of security event are we looking at? And then further down, we just got some more kind of, I guess, hard nuts and bolts understanding of what this environment is. So we see the amount of subnets, devices, SaaS accounts, et cetera. So just to get an understanding as well, how Darktrace works is looks at network connections. We also look at connections going from endpoints. We can use endpoint detection that sits on there that currently doesn't look at process level, but I believe by year out, that's where we're kind of moving towards. So we can stitch it all together. So that's kind of the visibility that we're looking at when we see those kind of statistics on the left. Now down the bottom where it gets more interesting, this is our AI Analyst incident tray. So what that is it's a machine learning investigative tool that works in tandem with our AI detection ability. So what happens is a detection occurs, a prerequisite's met, a threshold's been hit, something is substantially weird, and it also looks like a certain behavior. It triggers, and then what happens is AI Analyst mounts an investigation based on that with a hypothesis, or two hypotheses. One, is there anything more interesting? If there isn't, no incident is generated. It is just whatever the detection is. It is no more interesting than that. Or in these cases we've seen down the bottom, they have found stuff that is more interesting than that threshold that's just been kind of triggered. And so the one that I will go into today is probably the most akin to ransomware. It's not a ransomware model, incident as such, but when we're looking at aggressive ransomware activity or ones using worms to enable that activity, so things like the NotPetya, things like WannaCry, this is how it kind of looks like without the encryption part at the end. So what we can see here is the incident right at the top involves a device called, say, CJD123, which is on the Holdings Inc. domain. We can see the three subcomponents that are listed chronologically with a time window for each up the top. So you can see that this happened at Saturday morning at 3 a.m. and sort of concluded just after 5:30 in the morning. The three subcomponents of it, so we've got a reconnaissance phase, we've got a lateral movement phase, and then we've got a command and control phase at the end. And we can see that's very easily stacked there for those who don't, who maybe, security is also part of their wider technical jobs. So what we have here is again, with that in mind, we've got a description of what this particular, reconnaissance activity is. So it's kind of, simplified so people can understand it. It's easy accessible. If you scroll down a little bit to the left, we see that it says related model breaches. So that's what I was sort of explaining before, how detections work. So Darktrace will see an activity, see how unusual it is. Does it meet the threshold for detection? Yes, it has. And what happens is AI Analyst has looked at these and gone, okay, there are 3 different detections here. They're actually all related. It's all the same thing. And not only they're related, there's some other additional stuff that are also associated with the scanning that is problematic. That's not just an event, it's an incident. So the results of the investigation are over to your right. So you got an overview of the scan. We can see the timing of the scan. We can see the subnets being targeted as well. So we see 2 separate subnets. We see 503 different unique IPs being scanned. We see how many of those connections were successful. And what's very interesting is also what ports are being scanned. So in this instance, we're seeing file shares being attacked. So 139.445, which leads us to the next stage, which is the lateral movement stage as well. So in this instance, if we kind of just skip to the investigative outcomes on the right, we see what files are written, which are 2 in this particular instance. We see what it looks like a payload, a portable executable, quite small, only 500 bytes, but that's what we kind of deal with today, especially when you're looking at things like a Cobalt Strike, very, very lightweight, it does what it needs to do. The destination share reveals 3 different devices it's been successful with, and interestingly enough, we see the $C sign, which means that they're administrative shares, which we can infer from that either the attacker has compromised a privileged account, or it's a permissions issue within this particular organization. And the last one, the second file we see written is service control, which is an popular administrative tool that attackers often use to create persistence when moving laterally, or to execute further kind of malicious code as well, which we see quite often. And if you're interested, Vic could probably tell you a billion stories where we see this stuff getting used day in, day out as lateral movement. And right at the end, we've got the command and control aspect of it. So this is this device going out and speaking to the attacker, probably giving an update about what it's been up to, and maybe pulling down additional payloads. This one I find probably the most interesting and indicative of why our analyst is sort of really helpful as that extra layer of investigation that happens automatically for you guys. Is so the breach, the detection, all that was essentially this device spoke once to an external endpoint, which you can see here. We've got a rarity for that one, 100%. So very, very weird for any device in this network to be contacting this host, and did it once. And from that, our analyst has concluded that, okay, it wasn't just once, it was 5 times. We can see additional URIs associated with that. It's also said, look, the methodology that it's been using is a GET, so it probably is trying to pull something back rather than essentially posting out an update. And then it's looked further abroad and said, well, if it's contacting this bad thing, how is it connecting to anything else that's kind of potentially bad as well? And it's thrown up 5 additional pieces of command and control as well with this particular device. So really expanding our knowledge about what's happening. And up to this point, if you're a defender, you're probably, worried because this looks like an attack. And the next question is often, well, are any other devices impacted, given this thing is moving laterally and it's a network level attack, not just isolated to one device? What our analyst has done in this instance is looked at all those indicators that it's developed itself and then applied them to across the network to see if it can find other devices exhibiting like behavior. And so in this instance, it's pulled back quite a number of devices, which is very common in a worming-like attack. It's going to be noisy. It's going to move quick. Its goal is to infect as many things as it possibly can as quickly as possible. So that's very, very similar. What's kind of missing from this, for the ransomware example, would be the next stage, which would be some kind of encryption level behavior. Now that's a lot of information for you to consume. I mean, as a defender, hopefully that's enough for you to make a call that you're engaged in some kind of live incident that's happening, and that from here you may want to go do start briefing people, start updating gateways, firewalls, or whatever to start getting ahead of this thing and start trying to quarantine it. In that instance, what we would say is how you'd extract that information so you can start using it and operationalizing it is going to the left and downloading it as a PDF. And so you get all that information, all those tabs, and it's down in that in a report format, which is again designed to be high level. So if you need to start briefing people outside of your technical teams, that they can at least have some kind of level of understanding of what's going on.
So if you had a good gateway product in your organization and you had the inclination to sift through all of your logs and consolidate all of the all of this information on a pivot table, and did it yourself and spent like 5 years analyzing all your logs, I suppose that you could potentially get this information out of your two different product sets, your gateway and your endpoint protection. The information will be there. Am I right? But it would be very difficult to access.
Yeah, it'd be there. I mean, because it's logging that information. It's that interesting conversation about logging. Like logging will always be there. You'll be able to see it, and it's great. And if you had an incident like this and it was a real problematic and you're rolling incident response, often as part of the wash up will be, let's look at the raw logs to see the ground world truth. But that is definitely once the fire is out, that's when you bring in the arson investigator, not when you're trying to put it out at that moment. So the other thing is, interestingly, and we see customers use this, we have an API, so you can dynamically update your firewalls using Darktrace. So those kind of suspicious endpoints that it sees, you can actually plug that update automatically. So you're actually benefiting from that machine learning back into the gateway.
In saying that, there's probably a broader conversation here about Antigen and network, which is our response capability. So whilst Darktrace has detected it, hey, we're under fire, we've got an added component here with Antigen and network, which can now contain, so coordinate and contain.
Yeah, well, we'll bring up an engineer example. Yeah, it segues quite nicely, mate. So on the bottom left, maybe the Henry Jones laptop one. So this is a bit different from what we're talking about. This is an insider threat example, where somebody's come in out of hours and disgruntled employee of some nature, and decided they want to basically steal a bunch of information from the environment and do it at hours. Again, this was probably pre-COVID, where people had to come into the business, so had to physically come in and do it. So they probably snuck in while security were away. But so just give you an understanding what we're seeing while it's kind of loads. So we're actually just playing this back in real time, this attack. So on the left, what we see here pre-attack is all the different connections. So this is kind of like your log information that we have, but we just we don't present that to you as the initial view. We can see the different connections, and the last connections are happening at 7:30 in the morning. On the right, we can see a visualization of the connections. So we see Henry on the left, and we see the file server on the right. We see the connection just fire off there. And we can see, so you can see the direction down, which looks like he's downloading stuff. And then we see a flitter of activity. If we just pause that there, we just have a quick look at the logs. What's happened here is the device might not be Henry, right? But Henry's device has, and again, a bunch of S&B reads, which if we look at the file paths, we can see they're related to payroll and HR, and they're related to different dates, which is, in this particular instance, not necessarily massively unusual for him, because this particular hypothetical employee works in HR. So accessing the information is part of their job, but it still triggers, if you can see, an unusual activity alarm, and also and a detection as well, probably due to the hour, the amount, the manner in which he's doing. So Darktrace is looking at hundreds and hundreds of metrics to understand anomalies, right? So it's gone, okay, they do access this, but the way they're doing it's kind of weird, which is different when you kind of think about rules when we look at auditing, which just says you can look at this or you can't look at this. This is going, well, you can, but you're doing it in a way that's kind of weird and out of the norm. So if we just hit play, we can see this activity escalate. So we'll see another connection being reinitiated to the file server, but this time not to payroll, this time to a legal directory, and that password being, that file being passwords. So that shows a real escalation behavior. He's now accessing stuff that he does, either never does or really is not part of their pattern of life at all, and it's to an obviously sensitive file. So what happened is the detection's being generated, And then on top of that, Antigen, the response mechanism, has stepped in. So up the top, you can see what it's decided to do, which is block connections from this device, so going to or from over port 445 for an hour. And so just to explain how Antigen thinks, is it's another layer of machine learning that goes, okay, what is it doing? How weird is the behavior that's happened? I'm going to take the most proportionate action. So in examples of things like malware that are running in the background, if it's beaconing or doing something else that you're not doing and it's blocked, you as a user, you won't notice anything. But in this instance, where it is an active user who's doing something like this, well, hopefully he is noticing something. So what would happen is that the attacker wouldn't be able to engage in S&B activity, whether external to the network or internal to the network anymore. And for a lot of insider attackers, that would probably be enough to stop them, because they don't really know how else to grab files outside of from the corporate network. But if he was a bit more savvy and he started escalating his behavior, maybe he would go to 139 or try something a little bit more fancy over, HTTP or something like that. Antigen network will recognize that escalation behavior and then will respond in kind with more severe actions on top of that, which can escalate all the way to just quarantining a device off a network so it can't send or receive any connections. As a defender, what you would see in this instance is you'd see an alert come in. I appreciate this is at Saturday at night at 10:30. So maybe an hour's not long enough for you to intervene and do something about this. What you can do is you can see a block come in and you can extend that block as long as you want. So in this instance, if you're a defender, it gives you that time to ring people, ask what is happening. Is this, has Henry decided, is there been a late night legal crisis he's been brought into, or any of those kind of things as well.
So does this have the capacity? So if Henry jumps on at 10:30 at night, downloads the password files and all the sales reports for the last however long, then jumps onto his browser and opens up his Hotmail account, I guess your product's looking at all of those behaviors and seeing the patterns and then blocking that from happening.
Yeah, and it gets more and more aggressive depending on how aggressive and escalatory the attacker is.
Whereas your standard products would say, actually, Henry is allowed to go to Hotmail, because why wouldn't you? He is allowed to go onto that directory because it's just part of his job. But the behavior and the patterns are something that Darktrace highlight, as opposed to the actual yes and no. He's allowed to. He's not allowed to.
Yeah, exactly. And it's outside of insiders, attackers are utilizing this all the time. When we look at exfil, it's all going through cloud. It's going through legitimate cloud servers. No longer, it's easier for them to set up, and they know it hides in the noise. No one's going to look twice out of a gig of data going out to, Amazon if they don't have some kind of anomaly detection in place. They're just think, oh, maybe they're working on a project that I'm unaware of.
Yeah, and that's cool. We haven't got too much longer on this demo, but can you just throw in a few comments there about how that Antigen works in regards to emails, specifically Antigen email?
Yeah, lovely. So that's it's modulus. You don't necessarily have to have this an email, but this is but you can access one from the other. So we've got email up here. So it's applying the same kind of unsupervised machine learning investigative techniques against email as it does to your network. So it's looking for things that are kind of weird. Again, using hundreds of metrics, things like sender, receiver, what kind of payloads, using natural language processing as well. So although you can't read the emails from here, it can detect what's kind of normal, what's different, references to things like maybe extortion or fear or anything like those types of issues. The other thing it does is also it takes a proportionate response as well. So it'll try to reduce the potential harm. So that could be all the way to blocking an email from getting in there, which an end user will get a notice that says, hey, you've got an email that's been held. All the way to just blocking out, preventing particular links from being active, either removing attachments or giving only a image version of attachments, so like in a PDF. All the macros are being disabled and it just gives you a readout of it, all the way to giving you more user behavior sort of interruptions, like giving you notice that, hey, this looks like this could be spoofing, little tags and that kind of stuff. So as a user, you're already kind of getting prompted that this person, they're trying to spoof an email here. So what they're trying to appear to be is actually not what their email actually is. They're trying to disguise in some way, shape or form.
A few years ago, one of our customers had their account compromised, and the CEO's account was compromised. The CEO sent the accounts payable clerk an email saying, the CFO is away. Can you please pay this strange bill into this US dollar bank account for 150 grand? Thanks. And the hacker timed it when the CFO and the CEO were out of town. And
Right.
thankfully we managed to sort that situation out, and it wasn't paid. But is that the kind of product, is Antigen email the kind of thing that would stop that, or does it not?
Yeah, absolutely. I actually had a case where a attacker had been in an environment for a while and watched how they were communicating and actually used their templates to send similar example that you have. It was a father-daughter run business. The daughter received a email from her dad, from her actual dad's account, to pay X amount of dollars, quite a large amount of dollars. We were in a proof of value stage at this stage, so Antigen saw it. We would have advised we to hold it. Unfortunately, they paid it. But yes, so Antigen emails by far one of my favorite tools of our suite, because it does a freaking fabulous job, especially in these sorts of instances. So the example I've got up on screen here is actually a similar thing, where it's from a legitimate person, but we've noticed it's been really out of character. So there's been a significant deviation from their usual behavior, whether that be in their word pattern analysis or just other anomalies that I think we're analyzing over 750 metrics alone and asking, is it normal for this user to behave like that? Is it normal for this user and their peer group? Is it normal for this user and the environment as a whole? So there's layers of learning. It's fabulous.
Yeah, and one of the great things about this particular example as well is why this kind of methodology, it picks up on some gaps with gateways, is that often requires some kind of payload, like an attachment or a link. When it's just graphed, where it's just somebody pretend to be someone else, maybe the payload is, hey, can you change this bank account details in the body? Gateways often aren't looking at that, right? It's a very hard thing for them to ascertain, because they're not looking at the language, and they're not applying machine learning to understand what's normal and what's kind of abnormal as well.
Totally right. We're fast running out of time. The other thing that I wanted to touch on before we turn into pumpkins is just the reporting, the sort of board level reporting. How can, if you did use the Darktrace product, or you put it in as an evaluation product in your network, what are the kind of reports you could give back to your board to saying, hey, we are all good, or hey, we're not all good?
Great question. Something that we've spent a lot of time investing into in the last few releases is our executive threat reports, our cyber insight reports. So this is, again, across the suite, whether you're in email or in the enterprise immune system. As you can see here, we've got an executive threat report. So we've briefly seen a technical report of an incident, which is high-level summary with some technical details. If you're wanting to go a little bit high-level again, we've got the executive threat report, which gives you a broader sense of what's happening globally across your digital estate. So summary of breaches by attack phase versus looking more through the devices, like what are your most high-risk devices by their overall anomaly score. And then what sort of models are we seeing breached at a high rate? And that, again, is then split against things that are more of a security concern versus something more like compliance. What sort of configuration changes may need to be addressed? And
very good.
Comes with nice, pretty graphs for you as well.
Excellent. So, look, we're not going to stop here, folks, but I'm conscious that we've gone to 12:45. We'll be staying on to go through a few more things. The things that we'll be going through is questions and answers. But another very important thing from my perspective is whether a Darktrace product fits your economics and your capability to pay for it. So we're going to go through some scenarios of where Darktrace has fit into the market in New Zealand, and the rough pricing of this kind of suite. and whether it's right for you as an organisation. But for those that do need to leave, it's 12:45, and we thank you for joining us. In terms of moving forward from here, I'll share one quick slide for those that are departing. Bear with me. If you want to look up more and have an interaction with the Darktrace team, just search Darktrace on pbtech.co.nz. There's a page there, fill in the form, and we can jump on to you on a one-on-one and talk through what is best for your organisation. Or if you want a wider security assessment from our security team at PBTech, just email itservices@pbtech.co.nz. So for those that do need to depart, thank you for joining us again, and we'll be in touch. For those that want to stay on, we will now move into some examples of Darktrace in the New Zealand market and go through a few questions and answers. Thanks. So moving on. Can everybody see my screen okay? Most importantly, this is very, very important for me. I need to use this wonderful new tool that I found out on Teams. There you go. So now you can see me in front of my PowerPoint. How about that? So this is an example of a customer in New Zealand that has used the whole shooting match. They've used Salesforce, M365, they've Enterprise Immune System, the Antigen for network, and the Antigen for email. They've got 140 users and 1,000 IP addresses in the utilities industry, and they spend about $100,000 a year with Darktrace, which no doubt makes Darktrace very happy. Next example is a business in the automotive industry, 450 users, 400 IP addresses, and they use everything as well, and they spend $90,000 a year, give or take, on their Darktrace provisioning. Now, worth talking about in these two examples where you've got customers that are using your wider suite, what is the point of them having a gateway protection that they paid tons of money for, and an endpoint protection that they pay tons of money for, and now along comes Darktrace and says, why don't you pay tons of money to us as well?
Well, yeah, it's a really good question, and it's a one that we often hit up with through trials where we're essentially just going head to head and we're picking up the same and more. Why would you have both? And sometimes it just comes down to that it's just simple as that, and they replace one for one. Depends on also the size of the business as well. Some want that defense in depth, sort of what I kind of talked about before. We are, in many ways, we're solving the same problem, but also kind of different problems. So, if you can afford more security, we're never going to stop in front of you and say don't. But it's often a trajectory where we'll start somewhere in the with our own ecosystem. And as their billing cycles kind of move with the different products, they'll trial and they'll just slowly end up coming more and more into the Darktrace ecosystem. Also because they all play together very nicely too. They all leverage one another, and someone can go into maybe in Q&A, but it's they supersize each other as well, which is always an advantage.
So if you had Fortinet on your gateway and you had your UTM and 360 subscriptions up the wazoo, and then you had Checkpoint on your endpoints, and you were paying for that per annum, and then this $90,000 a year Darktrace invoice comes across your desk or your boss's desk every year, are you suggesting that that's a duplicate or a triplicate of security that's maybe not necessary?
It's definitely overlays. There's definitely overlays on it, and I guess it depends on your I would say your risk profile. I mean, at the moment when it comes to endpoint, we're not seeing process level information, which an endpoint EDR detection does, but that'll change within a matter of months. Which on top of that, we'll have the Antigen solution as well, so we'll be able to stop processes and stuff as well. So I think in many cases it's just a trial it. See in your particular environment, is it catching the same and more, or are they being complementary? So I think it's a hard one to answer as a blanket solution, but I'd say if you're interested and wanting to know, put them side by side and see is one outperforming the other, doing the same thing and more, or is they're both capturing sort of different things?
From an analyst perspective, like quite often with our proof of value trials, we're sitting behind the gateway, right? So we can see everything that it's letting through. So for a side-by-side picture of what's actually happening, it becomes very, very visible from within 7 days in the environment.
Because I guess Nirvana would be that you had a product that sat on your network and you could stop paying your subscriptions to your gateway and stop paying your endpoint, just use Microsoft or whatever.
Yeah.
And have one size fits all. But, you know, that's obviously not something that we hear commonly touted in the security industry.
Yeah, it's true.
Okay.
It's true. A lot of people are already entitled to all of the solutions that they're layering on top, especially when it comes to email gateway. A lot of unused Microsoft subscriptions.
Yeah. Right. Next one. So for those of us that nearly fell off our chair at those figures that per annum, let's move down to the more palatable versions. So this is a customer in the transportation industry, 270 users. I guess that's mailboxes. Antigen email software is 30 grand a year. So that's a an achievable figure for most New Zealand business if it can stop a lot of the I guess problems that come through email, right?
Well, when we're talking about ransomware and those big ticket things, it generally comes through the email. Generally, there are other avenues, but by far the most common vector is to go through your email. So, yeah.
And then the last one is a small company, 65 users, $20,000 a year, give or take, for the email protection. So for those on the call here, those are the kinds of figures that you can sort of have in the back of your mind in regards to the costs of a product like Darktrace. And now we will just move on to some Q&A. Let's have a look. A question here from Kerry. May I ask, the per annum roughly includes how many responses or hours or analyst help?
So we have services, and I think it's generally negotiated as well. So we have ask the expert and proactive threat notification services as well, which you can opt in. Often they get, it's part of the negotiated price. I'm not sure if that's inclusive in some of those prices because often they're not added in. But yeah, we have different sort of levels where you can interact with analysts. So, you know, Vicky's in charge of an analytical team who are on shift 24/7, and because we have analytical presence around the world, you can always access somebody who's on, it's their office hours, who, you know, maybe got an investigative question, maybe got a deployment question or something like that, or, you know, you want to start getting some advanced tuning, creating your own detections, et cetera, et cetera. And on the other side of proactive threat notification, that's I guess we call it, you know, affectionately our SOC, which is not necessarily what you think about when you think about a SOC. It's more we look at the high fidelity, the most high harm attacks. Our analytical team kind of sits there and looks at it and gets those notifications and investigates them in real time. And then if they see an issue, then they kind of plug it out to send a notification out. Vic, do you want to give a bit more detail, given you're an active participant in said SOC?
Yeah, I think that a realistic understanding of what it is, but I do want to put in here that you're not going to be left high and dry in terms of if you do a Darktrace trial and you wanting to go through, you do get training, and there is a very, very comprehensive training suite on our customer portal as well. And at least in my experience, and especially down this end of the world, we're never going to leave you hanging. If you're in trouble, or if you need help, we, like Liam says, are here 24/7. So yeah.
Very good. Right, Kara's got a question. This one's for you, Vicky. They use 3 different products to block phishing emails and attachments, yet they're still getting through. She's saying here that it's due to impersonation or vendor accounts being compromised. So it's other organizations sending in stuff. Does the email Antigen product also check attachments for this?
Yes. One of the things we actually excel in, one of the things I'm really passionate about, is those supply chain attacks. So because we're not working on that blacklist, whitelist. We can see, hey, we usually get communications from this person. Doesn't mean we necessarily trust it. We do run analytics against over, hey, does this person usually send links to this place? Is their language the same? Has it come from the same source it usually comes from? There's a variety of metrics that we're looking across to determine, does this email belong? Does the sender usually act this way? So I've lost count of the amount of times that I've caught what we would call a supply chain attack. Spoofing, do it with ease. I can sit here and say extol the virtues of it, but the only thing that's going to sell it to you is if you put it in your environment and put it behind all those gateways. And hand on heart, I can tell you, I'll put $5 on the table. We'll strip the pants off of it.
And we've got another email here from Chris. Thanks for giving me your name, Chris. Just regarding the privacy related to the Antigen email product. Chris, I asked exactly the same question, but from a different angle. I see the beauty of the email product in being able to stop things like sexual harassment and internal inappropriate emails being sent around by sifting through the emails and looking at the words and stopping the boss asking somebody out on a date, all of those kinds of things. But unfortunately, I've talked to Darktrace and they said, no, can't be done because we do not read the emails. So the question from Chris was, if you're sniffing around everybody's emails, what about privacy? So Vicky, tell us about the privacy.
As an analyst, as a Darktrace analyst, I have no ability to see what is in the content of the email. Security teams themselves within the organization can release that email to themselves so that they can review it. But as Darktrace side, we have no visibility of it whatsoever.
Very good. And the last question before we sign off in 4 minutes is, can you run through with us the onboarding process or the technical components of how we go about testing Darktrace in a customer's environment?
Yeah. I'll go that one. Well, what normally happens if you're interested in a trial, we have what we call cyber technologists, so our engineers kind of sit down with you and kind of map your your network, get a full understanding of what it is, so they can start thinking about costs and coverage and all that kind of stuff from a broader end, but also to enable the trial as well, because typically where we like to deploy is where we can get the most value out of it. So a lot of the times that's, we sit data centers or, with email, we're seeing everyone anyway. That's kind of a bit different. But maybe we're trialing SaaS and you have multiple instances around that. We're going to focus on the one where maybe it's the highest harm or gets the most traffic or the one you're most concerned about, and we kind of go from there. When it comes to the and whenever we go to deploy, the cyber technologists are there with you and doing it either completely for you, depending on the setup, or basically just on the phone with you, walking you through the steps. Depending on your setup, because I understand most of us are a hybrid situation at the moment. We can go fully virtual, we can go fully hardware. In most instances, it's a mixture of both. When we're talking about the enterprise immune system, when we're trying to look at networks, we have a master and probe relationship where we have a centralized box where all of this information's being, all of the machine learning is being aggregated and investigated and all that kind of stuff. But we can put probes at different sites. Again, they can be fully virtual, physical. They involve SaaS instances or whatever, and it all gets plugged into the one box as well. When it comes to endpoint, we have a very very lightweight endpoint solution that you can deploy very easily with how you normally deploy software updates throughout your network. But again, that also comes back through the cloud and into that centralized box for that learning as well.
I haven't done it myself, but I have been told the process in itself is not a long or complex process. It's pretty quick.
I think EIS is maybe half an hour, and email is, I'll say, like 5 minutes. You can do it over the, after a demo kind of thing. It's just about forwarding rules essentially.
Very good. Okay, team. Well, look, thanks for your time and presenting today, and certainly thank you to the audience for joining. I know that we've run out of time. Well, we've quarter of an hour past running out of time, to be fair. So I don't want to keep everybody too much longer. I'd encourage you to email me personally with your questions if we haven't covered them off. Just rodney@pbtech.co.nz, and me and the Darktrace team will get back to you with your specific answers to your questions. But in regards to taking some next steps, on the screen there, if you just search Darktrace at pbtech on our website pbtech.co.nz, that will take you to a form to complete, and then the Darktrace team will be in touch with you directly regarding what's best for you. And again, the wider security assessment is through our wider security team at itservices@pbtech.co.nz. So I really appreciate your time. Hope it was helpful. We're going to record this and put it on our Darktrace page. So that very same page in the next week or so, we'll have a copy of this video on there for you to replay, and really encourage you to be in touch with us. And we look forward to helping you out with your security moving forward. Thanks, team.
Thanks, guys.